Well, listen, Chris, thanks for taking the time to do this. I massively appreciate it. First things first, man, how's your day going?
Yeah, not too bad. It's all a bit hectic for me at the moment. I'm moving house literally tomorrow. That's why I've kind of got the weird background. So like literally boxes
Oh, shit.
upon boxes of stuff. So a little bit stressed out right now. But yeah, I'm okay, man. How about yourself? Are you okay?
Yeah, I'm doing cool. I'm doing cool. Best I can be in these days, it's COVID day after day after day in some way, shape, or form, right?
Exactly, man. Just living the COVID dream.
That's it. That's it. That's it. You moving far? You like moving towns, or you?
Um, I mean, well, I live right on the edge of Birmingham at the moment. So, like, when I say the edge, I mean like if our house now was on the other side of the road, we'd live in Solihull, and we're kind of moving into Solihull. So, when I say we're moving towns, we kind of are, but also we're not moving that far either. So,
Good luck with that, man. I know it's an incredibly stressful time. So
yeah, completely, yeah.
make sure you get an early night tonight, innit?
Oh well, well, you say that, but I've still got a lot to do. So.
How you been holding up then over the in the COVID times, the last sort of what are we at now? Almost 2 years.
Yeah, so I mean, I'm doing pretty well actually, to be fair. Like I'm really lucky considering, everything that's gone on, so many people out there who have, lost their jobs, so many people out there who have struggled financially, so many people have gone insane, just living indoors. I'm really lucky. My job has allowed me to continue to work from home. And even when we've been allowed back in, because I'm a teacher in a college, a music college in Birmingham. So when we've been allowed to have the students back in, we've been back in. So from like September through to January, last year we were in. Then obviously lockdown again in January, March. But then since then we've been back in March. And aside from venues not opening up, which is difficult, working in music education, we've been really lucky to be able to kind of keep going. Like my kids have kept me sane as well. I had I have a 1-year-old now, so she was born right at sort of the tail end of like the first real lockdown sort of thing. So that was definitely an interesting one.
Oh, but it was a nice opportunity, I suppose, almost to get to spend more time together than you might have had you been working.
Yeah, and there was definitely less stress about it. So like the kind of stress is when you kind of just go in places, and particularly when my wife was like heavily pregnant towards the end of that pregnancy as well. It was almost, I was talking to someone about this the other day actually. It's quite weird because when we had our first scan was about March when the first lockdown happened. So we didn't sort of make a huge Facebook account. I'm not a social media guy. I'm not the kind of person to talk about my life. I'll talk about my music and stuff on there. I talk about the occasional political opinion. Well, yeah. I tried really hard not to be super political on there. But it was really weird because we didn't make like a big announcement. There were some people that by the time we got to the time she was due, like most people didn't even know. Wow. Because like no one had seen us. So no one had seen like my wife's bump, and close friends knew. And I think my wife was telling me she was in a meeting. She was like, oh, I'm going to be off from next week. And like, oh, how can we off? She's like, oh, I'm having my second child. And they were like, sorry, what? This real sort of, oh, when did that happen? You're like, oh, like back in January, but like no one's seen us, so no one can tell us.
Oh, wow. Oh, that's amazing. What about its effect then on your musical work? We're talking about the effect on solos, of course, but also just your own mentality and projects that you might normally be doing.
The Nealix project exists entirely because of COVID. So, I think when we spoke to you, when we released the Brrraaains single, we kind of said, we were lucky enough to have got in and recorded a few songs before the lockdown really happened. So we kind of got those to tease out, and then we put the Negative Apex EP out back in January or February. So we kind of teased those throughout the year. And that kind of allowed solos to keep moving, and we were quite lucky with that. I'm quite an avid writer. Like I'll occasionally, pretty much on a daily basis, pick up my guitar and just riff. And every now and again, I'll have this idea, be like, oh, that riff, I need to record that, and I'll get my phone out and just create a really crappy voice note. But I'm quite fortunate at home before moving, like I've got like a home studio set up, so I've got an interface and Logic Pro and like a few bits and bobs that I can just record really basic ideas down on. And I started sending loads of ideas to the guys.
Yeah.
And this was sort of March, April, even sort of May through to June. And it was kind of frustrating for me to not kind of get anything back. And that's no disrespect to those guys at all, because, you know, I'm well aware that I'm very fortunate to have had like access to the hardware and the software, but those guys just didn't. So when it came to sending ideas, they were like, we should definitely work on this when we're in the rehearsal room. And, you know, every sort of 6 weeks, there was another announcement and new restrictions. And it just kind of got really frustrating for me. So I kind of felt like I had to start doing something with these riffs, with these ideas. And I was speaking to a really close friend of mine, a guy who used to be in my first metal band with, really nice guy. Shout out to Ash, big love to you, mate. But he really encouraged me to kind of start recording some ideas. Recommended a few programs I can use for things like drum plugins, because drums were obviously the big one I couldn't really do from home. I'm not a drummer anyway, so I didn't really want to have something that was just guitars and bass, and occasionally I toyed with a little bit of vocals, but those final ideas never kind of made it into any of the Nealix songs. So he kind of recommended a few things. I just tried out a few ideas, and the drum plugin I use is Get Good Drums, or GDD. Which is made by two of the guys from Periphery. So like they use real samples of Matt Halpin samples. There's a kit they've got called the P4 kit, which was all just samples they used on 4 album. And they just sounded really good, and I was really blown away by how good drum software it's got. It's scarily real, like to the point that I could make stuff sound. The only reason why I think my early stuff sounded programmed was because I never played around with the program enough to alter like the velocities of the way the drummer would naturally hit. So it sounded a bit computerized. And I just kind of started laying down a few ideas. And I put together this one song which I'd had probably about 8 years. I tried to get it into like 3 bands, and it just, no one ever seemed to really kind of dig it. So I thought, right, I'm just going to record this one song. I'm going to put the drums on it. I'm not great at mixing, but I'm going to give it a go. And I just put this song out, and it just suddenly seemed to get a bit of a response.
Yeah.
And that kind of started it. And I look back and I kind of think, well, actually, I have COVID to thank for all of it, because without the time to do it, without the encouragement of sort of friends to do it, none of this would have happened. None of the album that's you know I've recently recorded over the course of this year, and the EP that I recorded last year, none of it exists without COVID. So in a weird way, I have COVID to thank.
It's taking the positives out of any negative situation. It's been an incredibly negative period, so the fact that you can hold this and say this is what I've done from that period,
yeah,
on a personal level, is simply phenomenal.
Exactly, man, exactly. And it's that idea that I have to do something with music constantly. It's like I always have riffs and ideas, and it was just, you know, on a normal sort of week, I'll have like a couple of riffs and a couple of ideas, and I'll maybe sort of listen back to 2 or 3 of them and be like, actually, they're a bit naff. And there'll be 1 or 2 which I'll then take to band, and that kind of becomes something. But that's because we rehearse every week.
Yep.
All of a sudden, when that was taken away, I felt this bank build up, and trying to just find something to do with these ideas that I really liked. And as COVID went on, it just became more and more frustrating of not knowing when we were going to be back, and if we were even going to get back together at all. And it was just frustrating for me, and I just felt I had to do something with it.
Of course, the end result is Destinations, out on December 10th, 2021. I have had the pleasure of listening to this album, and try not to make you embarrassed, but obviously you already know what I think. I have written a review. It's out on the site. I fell in love with this album. It made very good a night shift go a lot bloody quicker listening to
thank you.
over again.
You. I appreciate it. It sounds really weird, even after sort of like 12 years of playing in live bands and making music. It sounds really weird when someone kind of comes up and says, I genuinely like your music. It sounds almost like I'm too used to the kind of people kind of give me like the false kind of, oh, I don't want to hurt your feelings kind of thing. When someone really likes it, I still don't know what to do with that. So thank you. Honestly, it means the world. It really does.
No, I know. I've got the opposite point of view where it's like I hate praising artists to their face effectively because obviously it could sound insincere or like I'm blowing smoke up your ass because we're talking. So naturally, I'm not going to be like, "Oh, I hate your album."
Yeah, exactly. So, but it's that kind of like weird thing where you kind of almost have to give people, you know, because it's such a personal thing, something that people have put, you know, huge amount of time and effort into and a lot of passion. And, you know, people wouldn't release songs if they didn't believe in them. But then when soon, you know, and I've been there where I've shown someone a song and they've just gone, it's all right, I guess. And you kind of like, what are you on about? This is a song that I love, but it's understanding people have different opinions and kind of accepting that as it kind of goes along with your own opinion as well, which can be a difficult minefield to manage sometimes.
It can be. But like I said, I love Destinations. And one of the things that grabbed me before I even listened to a single note on the record was what it is effectively based around, which is these 5 stages of grief. Naturally, that's going to have people think and ask the questions about how much of that is personal. Is that something you want to talk about?
Yeah, I'm quite happy to talk about it. Basically, it was around coming up to about a year ago. So I just put out the Antipex Nealix solo EP. That was the first kind of time I'd done something. I was really riding on the high of it.
Yeah.
And you know, I was starting to kind of think of ideas, and I've never really had like a solid release where I had like a huge concept. And I really wanted to start trying to piece together things that had like a purpose. I didn't want to write just for the sake of writing. I wanted to write with the purpose of a storytelling thing because, you know, as we've discussed before with Soul, as it is trying to say a narrative without having a voice, and that can be quite difficult to get across. So as I was kind of thinking about all of these narratives, and first of all, I was going down the political route and the people are arseholes and selfish and self-serving, and then I kind of had a massive breakdown at the end of last year, sort of around just after the Christmas holiday, sort of like really late December, like last couple of days of 2020 into 2021. And the breakdown wasn't about, you know, it wasn't about mental health or about anything. It was just I suddenly became conscious of my own mortality, and to the points when I would be lying in bed sometimes and, you know, suddenly freak out over the fact that one day I'm gonna stop breathing and my daughters are gonna be there. And like, one of the things I quite liked was the idea that I'm leaving something behind with the music. So I like that idea of, you know, even when I am you know, dead and gone, my daughters can listen to the music and kind of, even whether they like it or not, they can turn around and say that was bad. And I'm quite proud of that. And I kind of started to channel this, what was essentially a fear of death, like to the point when I couldn't sleep. I would lie awake till 3, 4 in the morning, just scared to close my eyes because I would then suddenly be like, oh, this is what it's like when you're dead, and freaking out about it. Like, I just didn't know how to process these emotions, and I had no idea where this had come from either. And I started Googling and researching a lot into, you know, a fear of death. And part of the things that they discussed was facing your own mortality is facing the 5 stages of grief with yourself. And I quite like that. And the throwback to that was I got reminded of that episode of The Simpsons where Homer eats the blowfish and he goes through those 5 stages of grief and has that really fast reaction to it. And I kind of started laughing at that idea, but then kind of started toying with the emotions that came from it. And the first song I actually put together was the song Denial, which was originally just called Scared of Dying, because at that point in time, my songs didn't really have, you know, there was no real kind of process to it. I kind of sometimes just sit down in the band's lockup. So I record most of it in Solar's lockup, which we have in Birmingham, which I'm very fortunate to have because it means I can record for free, essentially. And I just kind of started writing stuff down and playing riffs and starting off with these really quite dark chords that lead into something heavier. And all I kept thinking was every time I come up with the song title, it's just the first thing that pops into my head. Sometimes it's really funny and inane. Sometimes it's really serious. And that was the first one, Scared of Dying. And that's kind of where theme came from, because I then explored that denial. And then the second song I wrote was Anger. And because I was trying to find something to do with these emotions, I just couldn't figure out, sorry, excuse me. I just couldn't figure out what to do with these emotions. Like, we all know death is inevitable, but that wasn't the comfort to me. That made things worse. That showed me that my fear was justified. And I just didn't know how to process emotions. And it took me probably until about the March to really come to terms with the fact that I can close my eyes and go, do you know what? If I die tomorrow, it happens.
It is what it is.
And it took me probably about those solid sort of 3 months of not really sleeping, and just kind of processing the emotions. Like, there wasn't a huge, I'm very fortunate that I've had no family members die. The last family member I had passed away was my granddad when I was 13. So that was, just over 20 years ago, and it's been 20 years since I've had to really process those emotions, with exceptions of pets and stuff like that as well. But you kind of take that as a little bit more of a granted happen. So I just couldn't figure out where these emotions were coming from, and I had to channel it into somewhere, and it just happened that the songs were the first place I could put my feelings. Like I say, I'm not emotive on social media. I didn't really want to reach out to people because it sounds ridiculous when you say I'm scared of dying, but as far as I'm aware, I'm perfectly healthy, and it sounds kind of, you don't really want to reach out and make yourself sound crazy. And even to the point when I was online looking at therapists to talk to about my kind of crippling fear. And the first thing that kind of gave me the release was the music. And I appreciate the fact that music is the thing that helps me deal with my emotions. Not just play music, but listening to music helps me deal with my emotions. And it kind of became this vicious cycle of actually playing music helped me, and it helped me come to terms with it. So those first 2 songs were written in sort of January and March, and it was by the time I got to March I realized I was okay with it, is because I was channeling my emotions in that way.
Did that make it then difficult, considering that you wrote the first 2, Denial and Anger? By March, you felt like you had gotten to a good place mentally. Did that make it more difficult then when it came to doing bargaining, depression, and acceptance? Or did it make it easier and going, okay, now I know what the stages are going to be?
It was a little bit of both. I think having the idea that I knew what the stage was going to be definitely gave me an approach to the music. When I went in to record the stuff for Antipex, I just went in and riffed until I found a riff that I liked, and then kind of recorded it, put a couple of layers on it, kind of just went down the rabbit hole of trying to find what I found. And sometimes that'd come in 10 minutes, sometimes it'd take 2 or 3 hours of just playing to find something. But with the themes of each song, I always knew how I wanted it to sound. So I always knew Depression was going to be a much more somber one. I always knew Acceptance was going to be slightly more uplifting. And it's just knowing how to phrase that emotion in song format that I sometimes found difficult. I'll be honest, I think I found Bargaining probably the most difficult one to write, because it was an interesting one where you've almost got this panic, but it's not trying to be anger. And that's the one I struggled with the most. But what I would say is when I did find the sort of the thread, it was the one that came together the quickest as well.
Okay. Considering what your story is behind the tracks and the album as a whole, how do you feel then that a person coming into it who has suffered a lot of potential loss and grief in their life on a more personal level, we're talking death and stuff like that, that they will potentially take that aspect from it and hopefully gain comfort from it? Is that something you're quite comfortable with, or does it make you kind of nervous?
I am a little bit nervous because it's partly how people respond to their own emotions. So like I say, it's, my musical taste may not necessarily match what somebody else likes in general. So my way of processing the emotion is through my own musical taste. So listening to a lot of Russian circles and Maybe She Will kind of stuff. And when I used to do a lot more running, I used to listen to like certain songs when I'd come to like the last mile, because I know it would really pump me and energize me and stuff. So it was more to do with how I was processing the emotions than more than other people, because I guess when I was writing it, I was being very selfish in this is for me. Mm-hmm. I'd never, I mean, I knew I was going to release the songs. I didn't know how long it was going to take. I hadn't really considered until probably just before I was about to put it out, before I sent it to yourself, how other people will accept these emotions as their own as well. It's definitely something that I've thought of since then, but I think over the course of writing it, it's not even something that entered my thoughts even once. It was just, this is for me, this is entirely cathartic to how I process my emotions, because when I think of anger, I think of heavy.
Yeah.
When other people think of anger, it might not be the same as what I think of. So this was entirely a selfish endeavor from the get-go. And if people can find solace in the emotions that I felt that align with their own, then that's great, man, and I'm happy. But if someone has a huge issue and say that that's not how I process my emotions, and that's fine too. And you know, people are entitled to their opinions, but this was a selfish endeavor from day one for me to process my own emotions, and hopefully other people do connect with that on a little basis.
Yeah, I would hope that nobody would dare criticize that aspect of it, because what is most music if not personal to the artist, you know?
Exactly, as well. And it comes back to, you know, what we were talking about when we go back to the Brrraaains single of being very political, and we were very mindful that we didn't want to take sides with it, because all of a sudden someone disagrees with your opinion, they don't like your band, and as a marketing strategy, it's just not smart. Like, I'm quite happy to align my own friends with those that have similar beliefs. And I've got friends who have got completely opposing beliefs, and we get on just fine as long as we all act adult about it. You know,
Yeah.
People are entitled to their belief, but when it comes to music, when you speak about something, people will listen to that and go, "Well, I don't buy into that, so I'm not going to listen to you for that reason." So it is a dangerous game to kind of play. But yeah.
Well, I'm personally glad that worked out. When do you remember when you decided, okay, it is still for you, I want to put it out there to the world?
I think probably around September time. So I'd written 4 songs at that point in time. So I'd had the overture. I always wanted that overture to be representing something that somebody was receiving bad news, whether it was their own death, whether it was the death of someone else. And that was kind of what it was meant to be. It's meant to be like the doctor giving the bad news, or the phone call from somebody who you've been anticipating. I had that. I'd had denial, anger, and bargaining at that point in time. I'd even had depression written in a really early format for quite a while. I just hadn't really got acceptance. And it was before acceptance that I was kind of being like, okay, this is the idea, but I'm actually going to put this out now. And that was kind of when it kind of hit me that other people will hear this, and almost kind of having the story to tell kind of gives me some kind of justification, hopefully allowing them to take me on the journey that I wanted them to go on, not necessarily journey that they want to go on, because you can't listen to an album about the 5 stages of grief and just be like, oh, I'll be all happy now. So it's definitely something that I knew I was going to try and take people on a journey, but it kind of hit into the September time when Acceptance was the last song that I wrote for it. And it was definitely around the time I sat down to kind of go, well, this is the final piece of the puzzle. And you suddenly think about what you're going to do after that. Because before then you're like, oh, I've got songs to write. That's going to take months, if not years, to record and mix and master, and finding time with between solos and working and having 2 children and a wife and stuff, it can be difficult. So sometimes they'd take massive breaks and I'd come back to it. I never had any idea how soon or late it was ever going to come out. But it was definitely something that it hit me sort of around the time I started the last song, when I was like, this is the last one. That's when it kind of hit me that this is going to be something people can hear.
Starting to feel a bit more real, yeah?
Yeah, definitely, man. I'm almost going through the same emotions again, just in the anticipation of putting it out.
Well, we are. As of the time we're recording, we're 2 days away from release. Excuse me. As you've been doing this for so long, does this time still kind of excite you, or are you more wary because releasing music it can often be the long game?
It's definitely very nervous for me releasing music, and it comes back to that passion. I'm really happy with the songs. I think for me as a songwriter, these are probably some of the best songs I've written. I think every song on this album trumps Antipex, and that's not to say that I don't like the songs off that last release. I'm really, really passionate about writing good songs, but I always go with Rob Halford's mindset. There was a thing I read about with Rob Halford before he released Firepower, and they said, which, you know, just general interview questions. The band's been around for 50 years. They've probably heard it all before. And someone sort of says, you know, what's your favorite Judas Priest album? And he says, the new one. And obviously that sounds very cliche, doesn't it? Everyone's like, oh, of course you've got to say that. That's what you're marketing. But he then says afterwards, if you don't think you're releasing the best music that you ever have, then why are you bothering? And I was a bit like, oh, that's what I need. And that's why I spend so long sometimes trying to find those riffs that I connect with, and trying to learn the mixing process, because the whole thing has been a lesson in mixing and mastering for me. Like the last EP I didn't master. My friend Ian Todd, he mastered it, and he's so good with the music side of stuff. Even with the mixes and stuff I was doing, I was sending stuff to him and my mate Ash. I was sending stuff to them on like a weekly basis, and they were obviously giving me loads of advice on mixing. But suddenly getting into that sciencey side of the music was definitely an eye-opening experience for me as well.
That's incredible. So Nealix has been more than just a musical output for you. It's also been an incredibly learning experience and more skills picked up along the way. Oh
yeah, absolutely. I think that the biggest thing I've probably taken from doing the project, and I learned this definitely during the process in between the last EP and this album, was I think sometimes I write very similar style riffs, and you know, when I have a riff and then I take it to the guys and Solars, Dave will have a very different idea for what the riff could sound like to what I thought it could be. Jack will have a different idea for the drum beat, what I thought it could be, and Andy will have some different bass ideas. So all of a sudden my idea becomes its own entity. But when you're left to your own devices and you're left to your own creative process, first couple of songs you come out that you're like, yeah, these are really good. And then when you get sort of like 5 or 6 songs in, you kind of like, that sounds a bit similar to some other stuff I was doing. And actually, my mate Ash, the first song I sent was Denial. And there's a melody in that is actually used on Antipex, which he said he really liked, because he likes the whole sort of the call and response to previous releases. So I thought, okay, there's something in this here. But it also made me realize that I don't want to be a one-trick pony. I definitely want to push my own creative boundaries and not just play the heavy palm-muted open strings. And I really want to kind of think about my melodies and stuff that come along with that. Obviously, I want it to be heavy. It's the one thing that Nealix and Solars are definitely separated on, is I definitely push the metal more than Solars do. And that's not because Solars don't want to push the metal. It's just the styles of music, when they all come together, kind of tear away from the slightly heavier side of things. Whereas, so for example, Jack doesn't use a double kick pedal and stuff like that. So you haven't got that very archetypal Slipknot drum fill kind of sound. Whereas this, I definitely lean a lot more into that metal sound. And it's something that I use to kind of step away from Solars in its own right, but still I am a member of Solars, and there's riffs in there that you can hear where other songs have kind of stemmed from with that band as well. Because I did wonder, before I even hit play, I did wonder, obviously, with your Solars work and the fact it was going to be instrumental as well, had me thinking, okay, how different is this going to be from Solars, and how much like space have you put between the two? So you've kind of described it yourself there. I will ask though, and it's not that I think it was needed, I really bloody don't, but did you ever think, you know what could make this really different? Vocals. Did you ever consider it? A little bit, yeah. Not a whole lot, because I like bands that have vocals. I have nothing against bands that have vocals, and I've been in many bands with vocalists and stuff like that. I have nothing against them at all, but this was definitely trying to follow that Russian Circles kind of route a little bit. And one of the bands I came to really sort of getting back in touch with, sort of round about the time just before having the breakdown around Christmas, Cult of Luna. Oh yeah. And Cult of Luna, one of those bands that have definitely been on the scene, and I've seen Cult of Luna at Art Tangent before, and I remember coming back thinking, yeah, they're good, man, but never really like delving into their sound. And then when I started trying to come up with some of these songs, I actually kind of thought, what if I came up with some of the Cult of Luna kind of style screams? And because I used to be a screamer in a band as well, I was like, well, it's something I can do. It's not something I've done recently, and it is something I have started to get more back into, because I want to try and do some with the Nealix stuff in the future. But it's not something I kind of had the right song for. I think definitely Anger, I tried to find space for it, but it just felt very shoehorned in, and it needed to feel natural. It comes back to that sort of, if you don't put out your best stuff, why bother putting out at all? And every time I put screaming vocals in, it just didn't feel needed. It felt like the song was doing everything it needed to do, and other songs I just don't think had a place for it, like Depression. I'm not the greatest lyricist in the world, and you know, my old metal band is testament to that as well. And I just didn't want to try and put really cliche depressive lyrics in there for the sake of it. Is it something I'll do in the future? Yeah, I think it will be, but it just didn't feel like the thing I needed to do for this project.
Oh, no, absolutely. It's one of those where I can't even imagine it with vocals now. But I wanted to ask then, you must be super proud, because there's one thing that I think I've taken away from Destinations more than anything else, is that you have, through instrumental music, managed to portray the feelings that I think most people would get when they read a title. For example, anger, denial, and aspects like that. And you're thinking, okay, as you said, anger, it should sound heavy. Maybe it's going to be fast. Maybe it's going to be frantic. Even bargaining, a certain frantic edge to bargaining where it's almost desperation and stuff like that. That's what I kind of feel is what makes Destination so special. Do you agree?
Thank you. That means a lot as well, because as I say, I put a lot of kind of time and thought into crafting some of those riffs and that feeling as well. It's definitely something I actually tried really hard to do. There was even a few points when, in particular, between Acceptance and Bargaining, there was a point when I'd written Bargaining and I was writing Acceptance. And when I was writing Acceptance, because it had that almost like, because it still had to be heavy, because it's going to be too much of a departure to not be metal when you've had, like, you know, 5 songs of fairly metal kind of sounding riffs. There was a point when I almost kind of had to backtrack and be like, actually, maybe this would be better to be bargaining. Maybe this is kind of trying to channel those emotions a bit more. But I tried to kind of push through and not backtrack, because I was really happy with Bargaining, and I was really happy with how it turned out in the end. And it was definitely something I really put a lot of time and thought into crafting those emotions. So every time, like, for example, like with Denial's not just a process of an emotion, it's actually the journey between each emotion as well, which is why the end of Denial, they've got some like really heavy stops. At the end of Bargaining, it's got that fade out into the soft acoustic guitar, which is kind of meant to be the start of the depression. And it's little bits like that where I'm trying to phase into the emotion, not just say, okay, this is anger, so it's going to be heavy, but trying to take that person on that emotion of starting to feel what anger feels like, and then what happens at the end of processing that emotion as well.
You mentioned The Simpsons earlier on in regards to that Blowfish episode. Do you watch American Dad?
I do, yes. Not so much in the last kind of year or two, but yeah, I have watched many episodes of American Dad.
The reason why I bring it up is because similar to how you were thinking that, when I was listening to this, I kept thinking of an American Dad episode where Jeff Haley's boyfriend, was sent away in a spaceship. And there's an episode based around them, Stan and Roger, trying to get her through the 5 stages of grief as fast as possible so she can be their line judge. Do you know the episode? Have you seen that?
Oh yeah, I do have vague memories of that one.
Yeah, that's the one that I kept going through my head. And it's silly because it's a comedy and it's jokey and all that. But you know, you just end up thinking of these things. It was quite funny. It reminded me of that.
Yeah, I say, well, even I'm a huge Simpsons fan anyway. So like, definitely the first 10 seasons as well are iconic, and there's no getting around that. Even some of the original titles, even when I kind of wrote at that point after sort of like Denial and Anger, even when I knew I was kind of writing Bargaining, and even when I knew I was writing Depression, they all had dumb names. So like, for example, like Acceptance was originally called You Chose Fruit, You Live with Fruit, because it's from the episode of The Simpsons when Homer's driving a car with 2 ice creams and Lisa's got fruit, and she's like, do you want me to steer? It's like, no, you chose fruit, you live with fruit. It's just really dumb titles like that, which obviously we're never going to stick. But it just comes back to like my love of trying to like get things like The Simpsons into like everything, which we're never going to kind of be there, but it always comes back to that for me.
That's a new project for the future. Simpsons related metal.
Yeah. Well, there is already a band in America called Oakley Dokley.
The Ned Flanders.
Yeah, the Ned Flanders band. So yeah, I think there's definitely a gap in the market there for it once, because they're splitting up. So once they're done, I'm going to step into that place, and that I'm going to fill it out with all of the Simpsons themes.
That's long term then. What about short term? The biggest question I've got is because, of course, the natural inclination is that you'll be busy with Solars as things open up and you've got more going on, that Nealix will effectively be potentially a one and done. What do you think? I mean, I'm not going to put you on the spot and say, what are you planning right now, but more what you're feeling?
No, Nealix is going to exist still. It may exist in a slightly shorter term. There will be sort of maybe long gaps between. Definitely doing an album. This has taken me the better part of nearly a year to kind of do, for 6 songs, which sounds ridiculous. But for me, it's a time thing. And obviously, as Solars were getting back together, and then trying to wait till gigging could happen again, we've been writing and we've been still getting stuff out. So we've got a whole batch of new songs as well, ready to do something with. What that's going to be yet, we don't know. We are thinking it's going to be an album, but you know, the album we wanted before the lockdown, but this is a whole new batch of songs. This is still working, but Nealix is something that I need to have more than one outlet. Otherwise I tend to find, and I've done this in the past, where you've been in one band, and you know what's like when you go through like a phase of suddenly really loving a band. And it might be completely different to the last stuff you've listened to. So it might be that, for example, I loved Court of Luna, and I'm back into a love of Court of Luna again recently, actually. But then all of a sudden I'll go back and find, I really love like the Cooper Temple Clause, or I'll really go back and love Biffy Clyro, and I'll really go back and love these different kind of things. And I almost like try and write to kind of what I'm listening to a little bit. So I remember with one of my old bands, I definitely try to get my love of Alkaline Trio into. Hello? I definitely tried to get my love of Alkaline Trio into one of their songs, and it just didn't work at all. And it's one of the things that I found that actually I need to have more than one outlet to try and get all these kind of endeavors kind of out there. And the metal kind of stuff, you know, Solars does have a metal edge, but we're not a metal band. For the Reflections single that came out, you know, last year, and the same thing happened when Limbo came out a couple of months back now. Whenever I tried to send it to playlists on Spotify, you know, post-rock playlists was telling me, you know, we're too heavy, and then post-metal playlists were telling me we're not heavy enough. And it's like we didn't seem to kind of fit in anywhere for a period of time. And that's kind of why I needed to have another outlet, because I do love metal, and I do want to do something that's got a bit more of a metal feel to it as well.
I'm excited for whatever you do in the future, as always. No matter what you're working on, I'm confident it will be spectacular. But right now, folks, destinations, you have, as the time recording, 2 days. Hopefully the time you see this, you'll be listening to it on whatever you can do. It's going to be released pretty much everything, right? Spotify, Apple, Bandcamp.
Actually, I haven't done Spotify or iTunes that yet, but it's something that I am going to look at doing some point in the new year as well. When originally it was just the Antipex EP from last year, I kind of never really wanted to justify the cost that it was going to be. And it's not a huge cost, but it was a little bit of a glory, self-glorified endeavor at that point in time. But now we've got this out, and I'm really happy with it. It's definitely something I'm going to look at doing, and maybe even do a really short run of CDs and stuff like that. At the moment, it's just going to be on Bandcamp up until at least after Christmas. But after Christmas, I'm going to look at other platforms and stuff for it as well.
It's the right place for it to be, man, Bandcamp, because that way you're actually buying it and you can help support Chris.
Yeah, man. It's going to be up for pay what you want as well. I put all my music up for pay what you want because I'd much rather have, you know, 100 people listen to it and like it and connect with it, rather than just have like 10 people pay me for it, because music's, you know, I'm fortunate enough to have access to the software and the knowledge to do a bit of mixing and mastering myself. That I've been able to keep the cost really low, so I don't want to charge for it. But you find that on Bandcamp, a lot of people will just kind of pay you a couple of quid for it anyway, because they want to support the artists as well. So yeah, it's going to be pay what you want. I'm not expecting anything. People want to chuck me a couple of quid for it, I'm more than happy to do. It helps me keep things running a little bit in terms of like the costs of the stuff that I do, like the artwork, which I didn't do the artwork myself. I reached out to a guy on Fiverr, my one, and he's done a really good job on both my EP and album so far. So yeah.
Chris, we'll wrap it up there. We've been going almost 45 minutes. Thank you for taking the time to do this.
Thank you very much, Carl. I appreciate your time, mate. Thank you very much for the support as well.
Thank you very much for watching. You can check us out on gbhbl.com as well as on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter and Tumblr. Go to Patreon to help us out over there. That's patreon.com/gbhbl, as well as Big Cartel, where you can find some of our merchandise. We have a podcast running on SoundCloud and Apple Podcasts. And of course, if you like this video, do us a favour, hit the subscribe button and help the channel grow. Games, horror and heavy metal. What else is life for?